Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're back with Mr. David Radcliff. In our first section, we talked about earth care, environmental care. In this section, we will talk about more justice, social justice. Mr. David, please take it away.
Nice to see you again. Welcome back. So at New Community Project, we work on these three things: earth care, people care, God's creation, God's children, and then thirdly, we call it experiential learning, which is putting us in a place to see our world and ourselves differently, and then see where God takes us from there. So this time we're going to be talking about our work with in human justice, you might call it, and that's a strong biblical word all through the Old Testament, New Testament. God calling for things to be set right, for people to have a decent opportunity for a decent life. And so that's really what we're working at New Community Project. And really, one thing people lack around the world are those opportunities to live that better life. Choices, we might say, around the world. You and I have way too many choices. Think about walking down the toothpaste aisle at the grocery store. Way too many choices. But for people around the world, they often don't have a choice of choosing a good thing, a good path. They're stuck in some system or some life circumstance which they don't have the opportunity to make something better for themselves and their families. So that's the kind of thing we're working at. So we work specifically with our justice component part of our work with women and girls around the world, because they're often on the outside looking in, Native communities, because they've had the bad luck of being in the way of powerful people and the things those people wanted, and they've just been pushed aside often. And then also marginalized people in our own communities, because there's a lot of people in the United States that are having a tough time making it these days. I'll talk a little bit about each of those as we go along. Well, today, and you're college kids, but for elementary and high school kids, 129 million girls who should be in school, in elementary or high school, are not around this world. And if I was in the room with you, I would ask you, what are some of the reasons for this? What are some of the obstacles or barriers that keep a young woman from going to school around the world? And you'd come up with, I'm sure, a lot of good ones. Things like poverty. We work with girls in Nepal that I'll tell you about in a minute, who for lack of $200 per girl per year, their school was over after fifth grade. I'll be telling you about that. Also, something as simple as a water bottle. We throw away 60 million water bottles in the United States every day. Every month, that's a tower to the moon that go into the trash. Well, there are children in South Sudan who can't go to school for lack of a water bottle because there's no water fountains at the school. They've got to walk from their home a couple of miles away. Then they get to school and there's no water fountain of any kind there. And if you don't have something to drink during the day in an equatorial climate, you are in trouble. And so some girls, simply for lack of a water bottle to bring a little water from home, cannot go to school. Lack of shoes is an issue for some kids. And also, there are places, South Sudan's another one that comes to mind, where there's a saying, to educate a girl is a waste of money. And that's because when you educate your daughter, you put investment, financial investment, into getting her to school, because it often costs some money to go to that next level of school, be it middle school, high school, something like that. Then when she gets married, she goes lives with the husband's family. So you don't get the return on that investment. His family got the return on. Now, we can all say that's a short-sighted way to see something. When you've got a young woman and the importance an education would have for her in her life. But for some families, that's the cultural pattern, and you just don't go beyond that. So those are some things we provide. So we work at those things. We try to work at these things at New Community Project. We provide scholarships for girls, hygienic materials for girls, if they need shoes, if they need backpacks, whatever it is that they may need. But sometimes the cultural barriers are almost a bridge too far. I got a letter a couple of months ago from a girl named Josephine in South Sudan. And her elder sister, well, her dad had died. That was the key factor here. Her father had died. And in that culture, when your father dies, his brother takes control of the family. So your uncle. Well, the uncle may not have as close a relation with the daughters as the dad did, because they're just his nieces. Well, he had already, and he's in control of the family, and if he marries off one of the girls in that family to some other man, often an older man with already a couple of wives, this guy, the uncle, gets paid in cows and goats and money. It's like a financial benefit to having married off one of your nieces in this case. Well, he had already married off Josephine's older sister at 15 years of age. Josephine, who was 10, was realizing she was next. And so she'd made a decision she needed to get out of there somehow or another. Well, some friends of hers came to her one day and said, hey, we're leaving tomorrow. We know where there's a school. We're heading out from there. We've got to get out of this situation. They said, "Are you with us?" She said, "Yes." Off they went the next morning, traveled 6 days and 6 nights with no food or water. Finally made it to a school, Blessed Bakita School for Girls, a Catholic school in Naurus, South Sudan, where the headmistress, the principal, welcomed her, gave her a scholarship that New Community Project provided, and now 5 years later, there she is, still there, safe and sound, you might say, from early marriage. And just another fact about young women in South Sudan, because they do get married off at early ages sometimes, often to older men. They say a young girl in South Sudan, a 15-year-old in South Sudan is more likely to die in pregnancy and childbirth than she is to graduate from high school. Those are the odds. So anything you can do to get a girl out of that predicament, you've got to try to do. We also, we built a school a couple of years ago in South Sudan. We don't usually build schools, but our friend said we need a girls' boarding school for a couple of reasons. One is when the girls go home at night from a regular school back and forth, they have so much work at home to do they can't do their homework. And also, if you have girls and boys in school together, often 1 + 1 = 3, if you get my drift there on the math. So for these reasons, we built a school. We had to raise $35,000, but we found a way to do it. Our network came through from us around the country, and we built that school. We also work with girls' education and women's programs in Nepal, in South Asia. We work with a group, an anti-trafficking organization called Shakti Samuha. This organization was formed by women who had been trafficked into the sex trade 30, 40 years ago and had gotten rescued as young girls or young women from that experience, were brought back to Nepal, and nobody knew what to do with them. And of course, they'd been thoroughly traumatized by being trafficked. And so they started an organization to help young women like them who are coming back from the sex trade get their lives back together. The trauma counseling, the friendship with other girls who've been in their predicament, skills training to get them back into income-producing roles once they go back out into society, that sort of thing. So one particular group we worked with there, which has got to do with sort of the thing I was mentioning a while ago about girls not being able to continue in school, like for getting married. In this case, we worked with the Chepang girls. This is an ethnic group that's one of the lowest castes in Nepal. And so working with the Chepang girls, I met them 3.5 years ago, and I met a bunch of 5th graders who were graduating from 5th grade, but then that school was over for them because they couldn't afford the $200. We talked about cost being a factor. They couldn't afford the $200 to go to the next level of school. Now, it was a 7-hour round-trip walk up and down a mountain every day to get to school. And did I mention being attacked by monkeys? Monkeys see a young schoolgirl going to school with a backpack, they think granola bars. Well, there's no granola bars in those girls' backpacks, but the monkeys don't know that. So they have to fend them off with sticks and stones. Anyway, so 5 girls who were graduating from the school there when I met them, and it cost $200 a girl. That's $1,000. I can raise $1,000. I mean, we turned to our network, people like you, and said, hey, we've got this need right here. These girls are not going to be, and if they're not going to school after 5th grade, they're vulnerable to getting married at 13 or 14 years of age, or being trafficked to India, into the sex trade next door, which 30,000 girls are trafficked into the sex trade every year from Nepal, to India primarily, but also to East Asia, to the Middle East. Anyway, so we decided to support them, and then the next year 11 more graduated. The next year 14 more graduated. Now we're supporting 27 of these girls. But if they're willing to walk up and down that mountain and to face off the monkeys and all that other stuff, the least we can do is give them the support they need financially. And they also returned the favor, sort of. They brought us jars of local honey from their community. So we got the money, they got the honey, and everybody's got something to give in this world. A lot of times we in rich nations like ours think we're the only ones with something to give. Well, these young women have something to give us. And the last time we were there, they sang, they danced for us. It was really beautiful. So we've all got gifts to give. How do we enable each other and be grateful recipients of whatever somebody's got to share with us, even as we share with them? So let's see, what was I going to do next here? So also Native communities. We work with Native communities as part of our justice work. And in the previous section, I talked about the environmentalism of the Native communities, how they're defending our last wild places, while also just keeping their cultures alive and strong. I mean, they say Native people have been, I just was in Pennsylvania talking at a school with a guy who does research on Native communities in Pennsylvania, and he said they found an archaeological dig where Native people were there 19,000 years ago. I mean, you know what? They were first comers to this continent. And so there they are there. And so, they've kind of got a right to be here, but we've sort of pushed them out of the way. There were 60 million bison on the Great Plains when there were 60 million bison on the Great Plains when the white people first arrived. By the time they were finished the killing spree, there was 100 left. General Sherman, I guess, said, a dead bison is like a dead Indian. Because you're taking away their food supply, you're taking away the things for making clothing and maybe tents, also cultural traditions that have to do with the bison. And a fifth grader in Warrensburg, Missouri told me last week that bison would lead native people to water. I had no idea about that. But somehow they can sense where the water is and native people could follow them and there'd be a water hole there. Anyway, so we're supporting native people. And one of the main places we're working on that is the Ecuadorian Amazon, which you could go to with us to see these places. We're going down the Amazon rainforest next May. Just keep that in mind. Anyway, we're down the Amazon rainforest, and one of the things we're doing is helping. We've been working with an older shaman named Aurelio for 20 years now, visiting his community there in the rainforest, and he passed away about 8 months ago. But before he started his health decline and eventually led to his death, he'd been working with his grandson Franklin to help him understand the ways of the forest, the spirituality of life around them that God created, also medicinal plants and how helpful they can be, teaching them these things. So we actually supported Franklin in getting some of that kind of training from some other shamans in the region. Also, now Franklin wants to be a teacher in the local school because he wants the school kids to not forget their language, to not forget their culture, to remember the kind of preciousness of the rainforest, to learn about the herbs and things in the rainforest that can keep us healthy. All those things. So we're supporting him in getting training to be a teacher at the local school. So anything we can do to keep people like these in the game, in the rainforest, because as I said, they're defending this place and they're passing on this valuable culture that a lot of us have left behind somewhere along the way. Then the final thing that we work on in terms of this part of is the marginalized people in our own communities. I just got back from Vermont. We have a sustainable living center in Vermont where they're growing food in an organic way, a climate-friendly way, and they're feeding 100 households up there per week that come to our food share center at the Baptist church right there in town. I think it's American Baptist. I think you guys might be American Baptist. Anyway, they're working with the American Baptist community there to keep these people with the food they need. And so there are kids that come there. This could be you. While I was there a couple of weekends ago, there were the squash teams, men's and women's squash teams from Middlebury College had come to do a volunteer day there, and they harvested, among other things, squash, interestingly enough, but also potatoes, other kinds of root crops and other things, carrots and whatever. By the time the day was over, they had 780 pounds of produce to help people in need have the food they needed. We also get food from Trader Joe's, where food is going out the door because they have to throw it in the landfill. So much food's our food system is so messed up, but so much food's coming in, they have to make room for it on the shelves. And then you have to do something with where that other food was on the shelf. And it's going to put it in the dump, but we intercept it twice a week and come home with a pickup load full of food from Trader Joe's. And that's fancy eating right there. But now it's going to people, also the poor people, who would never be able to afford to buy it themselves. The other thing who we work with there are a community of gleaners, an organization of gleaners. Now, in Leviticus or someplace in the Old Testament, I can't quote you even the book or the verse, but in Leviticus it talks about leaving food in the fields for the people that are poor, for the stranger, for the refugee, these people that don't have the food they need. Don't clean out your fields completely. Leave something behind for your neighbor, your needy neighbor who needs these things. So we work with a group of gleaners who go out into places where there's been industrial harvesting and nothing's, they aren't able because of the machines to pick everything that's there. And so they then are able to go out and glean, take that food and to put it back to people that need it. So, we have to think about what we can do in these situations. So there was a girl named Sarah from Pennsylvania who she'd heard me speak in church youth group and that sort of stuff and youth retreats and that sort of thing over the years. Well, at one point, she had been hearing some of these things and was concerned about people, especially in South Sudan, the young women in South Sudan I talked about a few minutes ago. Well, she decided on her 16th birthday, she didn't want any gifts for herself. She wanted all her friends and neighbors to contribute money to a fund that she wanted to raise to help send to the girls to school in South Sudan. On her 16th birthday, she set a goal of $1,600. I thought, like she's going to do that. Don't doubt a young woman with purpose and passion. 2 weeks later, the check came in the mail for $1,600, which will keep about 30 or 40 girls in school in South Sudan for a year. That's a big deal for those young women. It was a big deal for Sarah to have been a part of that. And then she spent her 17th birthday in South Sudan with us on a learning tour to meet the girls that were part of her new community. We all got to think of the thing we can do the thing we care about deeply, the thing we can act on, and the goodness it will do in this world, not only for our world, but also for us, making us feel better about the part we're playing here. May God bless you.